My name is Sven. I will just go through and tell you a little bit about myself and my background before I get into anything that's like more technical or whatnot. This is just a little bit of an introduction about who I am, how I got into the video game industry, and just first also, I worked primarily as a concept artist, so I'm on the 2D side of things a lot, the spearhead of most design. But a lot of what we do also applies to whether you're talking about 3D or animation or any other kind of design. So I think really a lot of people can take, a lot of disciplines can take something from this. But it is primarily my focus to be 2D in a lot of the things that I work on. All right, so a little bit about me becoming an artist. The key points was, as a kid, I constantly had my head in the clouds. I was constantly daydreaming. I loved stories, and I couldn't get out of even my own head, to the point that even back then, my parents thought that I had a severe learning disability, and things like math made no sense to me. There was no diagnoses or anything like that back then. They were just like, oh, he's special, that's it. So it was quite a struggle, but from the very beginning, my parents knew I was an artist. They could see how visual I was. So I have an obsession with stories. I love stories so much. When I went into school, finally out of high school, I don't know how you guys feel, but when I went to high school, it was like, here's a piece of paper, draw, you get an A. It was like, not really a lot of training, but once I got to college, that changed drastically. My professors and mentors, I had some really great ones, but there were a few in particular that really challenged me. Some people might say they pushed really hard and made people uncomfortable, but I love that, because it really did challenge me and push me. I could name a few in particular. They're long gone now, but I learned a lot from them. But then when I got to college, of course, then I started getting some real training. One of the things I had to learn too was to be humble. I grew up with that kid in high school who could draw better than anyone. I was like that guy. But then I got to college and I'm around everybody else, and you develop a little bit of an ego, but then I had to let that go completely. I learned that very early, and I will say that going into the industry too, that's another thing. You just gotta let go. I've worked with too many artists who come in thinking they're the bomb and they don't grow. But definitely I learned how to just not only get challenged, but get out of my comfort zone. I was talking a little bit earlier to one of the students here, and I thought I'd just throw this in there, but one of the things I did in college too, which I would really advise anyone to do, is explore other forms of design, especially visual design. So in college I was studying illustration. And I'll talk about that actually too, considering my schooling and training. So I was studying to be an illustrator for novel covers. I wanted to paint novel covers, so I was learning oil paint. Digital media wasn't even a thing. We weren't drawing on computers. It was all traditional. So I was painting, and I wanted to paint novel covers. But one of the things I wanted to also do was I took fashion design classes. It was not part of my program. I was just super interested. I was like, I want to draw characters, paint characters. Maybe I should learn fashion. So I took fashion design classes, and I've been practicing that, going out and learning other forms of visual design ever since. Playing video games was something I always did, always loved, but I never thought I would ever work in. I thought I was going to, again, be a painter. But once I got out of college, I didn't really know how to sell myself. Being an artist, and I'm sure a lot of you identify as introverts, I was a massive introvert. I did not know how to market myself. I did not know how to put myself out there and get my work out there and get jobs. But I love playing video games. And I thought, who does this? Who designs these? Someone's got to be drawing these things. So I started looking into that on my own. And I realized there was a thing called a concept artist. Not really well known back then. But I wanted to do that. So I picked up a mouse. I started drawing with a mouse on computers. And I was doing full-blown illustrations. I don't know if we'll get to it, but I brought some slides of some of my really old stuff from when I got out of college and started playing with drawing with a mouse. And I just got really good at that because I couldn't afford, I didn't have access to anything like a tablet. Definitely, Cintiqs did not exist back then. So, and in fact, when I got my first job, I started drawing with a mouse, even in that one. But yeah, video games was something I always really loved, and so I wanted to figure out how to get into it. I didn't know how. And anytime I would apply to a job, they said, we want someone with more experience. Always happened. So I thought to myself, well, maybe I just need to get that experience. So I started putting myself out there as a contract artist, working for dirt cheap for about 2 or 3 years. And I built up a portfolio. And eventually the next job that I did apply to, I had a portfolio of work. I showed it to them and they were like, yeah, we'd love to hire you. It took a while, but it was my own path. I had no guidance. I figured it out on my own. And I just knew that that's something I really wanted to do. That's where I belong. My first job was actually the game I was playing at the time, too. There is an older, very old, I started a lot of my heavy gaming in MMOs, and there was one called Dark Age of Camelot, and I was playing that one at the time, and I applied to that company. I had already done fan art of like armors and thing content, and I showed it to them, and they were like, yeah, we'd like to hire you. So that was my first job in the industry. These are a few of the games. This doesn't include everything, but this is a lot of the games that I've worked on over, you can see the time periods as well. I got into the industry, my first job at EA Mythic, which was Mythic Entertainment at the time, in 2006. I went from doing contract work, illustration, and whatnot, into actually having a full-time job in the industry at that point. Went on to work on Warhammer Online, another MMO based on the Warhammer series. Then over to Rift, which is another MMO. And at that studio, Tryon worked on Atlas Reactor and then an unannounced project which never got made, but it was a lot of fun to explore. After that, I actually moved out here to, so this was like a little bit of like East Coast, West Coast, back and forth. And then CCP, Spark, brought me actually out to Georgia. So 2016, I moved out here to Georgia. CCP is a studio. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them. They are a smaller studio, but they're in Reykjavik, Iceland. I thought I was going to go to Iceland, and then they said, hey, we got a small studio in Atlanta. We want to send you there. And I said, nah, sorry, thanks, bye. And they're like, just go out, check it out. So I did it, and I was like, oh, I like this place. It's in Decatur. I like it. So decided to take the job. I'm out here to work for it. Spark was a virtual reality game. And that one was very interesting. I've never worked on anything like that before. Completely have to think about things very differently. The space you're in, how it feels in VR versus, you know, even a 3D model, just looking at it on the screen. So it was quite a challenge, but I enjoyed that project quite a bit, learned a lot. From then I went on to be a contract artist working for Bluepoint on the Demon's Souls remake, which is definitely, if I were to say that there's a genre that I fall very naturally in, it is something like Demon's Souls. It is dark, it is gritty, it is fantasy, it is, yeah, that's my thing. I love it. And that's why I look back at my time at Warhammer Online, I really loved that too, because it was kind of the same thing. From then I moved on to High Res, which is up in Alpharetta. I'm sure a lot of you know about High Res. Worked on Smite for a good number of years there, and then eventually moved on to where I am at now, which is Funcom, working on Conan Exiles, and we're also working on the new Dune survival game MMO that's coming out. So that is what I'm doing right now, and I've done everything from working as a concept artist to a team lead and also an art director. So I've kind of gone back and forth doing different things. Right now, I'm a lead, and I've got my own team of artists and outsourced artists too that I have to wrangle. I don't know. So, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my approach and what this is about is my approach to coming up with ideas and developing those ideas for things like a character. This can be applied to anything. This can be a prop, this can be environment, or whatever. One of the things that I have found working with other concept artists is, and this is not to knock on other artists that I've worked with, but there have been a few in particular who really just draw things that look cool. And that will get you into the industry, that will get you a job, that'll be fine. But there is another level of intentional design and thought process and planning that really separates artists. And when you see it, you know it. So this is something that I really hammer into my artists on my team. And I work as not just their lead, but also a mentor. So I'm constantly doing demos for them at least once a week. But this one, again, is a character that was for Smite that I just quickly threw together. This is an older piece, but still applies. These are my 6 essential design steps. First, getting my mind in gear and getting inspired. Then building a mood board, asking myself what in that mood board is inspiring me. Then establishing a foundation design, then details tell the story, and then putting it all together. And I'll kind of go through each one of these. So getting my mind in gear, getting started. I'm sure everyone works differently, but if I am juggling too many tasks that are different, that's very challenging for me. I like to be very immersed in maybe 1 or 2 things, because my mind it's like gears. Switching gears can be hard, because when you get into it, switching to another thing, you can kind of lose that what you're feeling. So in this case, I ask myself things like, who is this character? And I start thinking about what is it, who is it, and writing down bullet points. I just start writing notes. Doesn't have to be a lot, just start writing, making a list of words and things that resonate. Use descriptive words that communicate in a nutshell who they are, what they are, where they come from. Setting key design points. So after doing that, I can say these are my columns, these are my pillars. I need these 4 things to be represented in my design. That really makes or breaks everything here. And then after that, I might have a few more that are like, this would be nice, this is kind of a cool idea, what if I did that, you know? But I do come up with those core pillar points, and there's at least, I don't know, on average, I'd say 4 or 5 of those. And then once I have that, and I plan out like this applies probably more to concept art, but I always tell like my artists on my team, don't just come up with designs. Say it's a character, don't just come up with 4 designs and they're cool. Intentionally plan out a spectrum. So I might say over here, starting on this design, they're gonna have a little less armor. They're gonna be a little lighter. But then I want on this end of the spectrum to be heavily armored. So I'm designing with a purpose, but also trying to find a target somewhere between in that spectrum. That could also be, this is a little bit lighter, not quite as dark, and then over here we're talking really evil. Like this is twisted, this is messed up. In fact, this probably won't work on our game because it doesn't like match our rating system. You know, it's a little too dark. So I will do that just to give them a spectrum to choose from, but also it's very intentional. I'm not just creating random designs or one like the cut is different on this one versus this one. Like I'm thinking about exactly what I want to show them and what I want to explore. So here's an example. So in Smite, if anyone, I don't know if anyone knows anything about this game, but it's very mythology based, and again, I love it because I love stories, I love mythologies. But we have a lot of these gods, and then we reskin them, or we did when I worked on it. And this one was Zeus, and they just gave me this task with Dark Knight. And I would ask them, well, what do you have in mind for Dark Knight? I mean, that could be anything. And they just said, just something that's like, I don't know, armored and dark. And I was like, okay. That can be a blessing and your worst enemy when they're like very broad. Because sometimes art directors or even designers might say, just make something cool. But they secretly kind of know what they want, but they're not saying it. That's where it can get a little bit troublesome sometimes. So there's a soft skill that I will talk about maybe a little bit more later, but learning how to be a detective and ask the right questions. Because sometimes a designer or an art director can't really tell you exactly what they want, and it really helps to be able to ask the right questions to find out what that is, or what they have in their mind. So this one I was like, okay, now seriously, is it just Dark Knight, or do you have any other things in mind? And they're like, no, yeah, just explore. I was like, okay, cool, thank you. So then I came up with my bullet points, as you can see there. So one of the things I thought, okay, let's do something dark. I mean, that's what I like to do. I put there like torture tools, hot iron pokers, spikes, nails, fanatical, insane, priest-like clothing. This is just that one. Because I'm thinking about, like I have a vision, I'm thinking about this character, possibly their background, and I do that with each one of them. And these are just like guides, really. Once I start looking for my inspiration and building up mood boards, this will help dictate that. But this is like, I'm already taking time to think about this and put these notes down. So, browsing relevant images and content. I mean, I'm sure everyone here's done that. You go out there, you look up things, some favorite tools, things like Pinterest, whatnot, just Google search anything. I've seen some people, I want to say this is a soft skill too, because I know some people who are really good at this. They know exactly what to type in to get exactly what they want to look at. Me, I'm okay. It takes me a little bit of time. Finding reference that hit those marks, and you're like, that's what I have in my mind. That's one of my core pillars. I want to add that to my mood board. Once you do that and you get like all these images that you want to be inspired by and work from, I like to look at them and ask myself, why? Why did I pick that? Why did I like this image? And start picking out those elements that you're like, this is what I want to incorporate. I don't want to do that design. Sometimes people look at my mood boards and they're like, why do you have just a picture of a shape there? I'm like, because I like that shape. Like, that's it. It's as simple as that. It doesn't need to be the exact thing that I want to draw. It can just be something that, again, fashion. I might go look at some high fashion and throw that in there. And it's just because there was a cut or a shape or something in there, or a texture that I really liked. But that's, again, being very intentional about your design. So here's an example of the mood boards. There is some art in there, but then there is like definitely material and historical reference as well. Even things like these faces and sculptures that look like they're wailing and in pain. Like, I was like, yeah, I want to get some of that in there. But there's a little something about each one of these that at the time, I knew exactly why I wanted to look at this and I wanted it to inspire me. And this goes back to like talking about like asking yourself why. Spend a little time studying your reference. This is like getting your mind in it. This is like getting your mind in all those details and those elements that you were looking for and you found. And also, again, asking questions about like, why is this effective? Especially when you're talking about pieces of art and you're looking at some of these other examples of other artists. It's like, why is this cool? What did they do right? What makes this so interesting? Always ask yourself these questions and try to figure it out. Obviously, mimic the things in your reference. Don't copy. It's a little bit more work, but this is lessons that it's a muscle. And as you do it more and more and more and more, you get better and better and better and better at it. And that's just coming up with designs. Just a little side note, I did a demo not too long ago with one of my artists who asked me, he was like, how do you just come up with patterns for like fabric or whatnot? How do you make it fit this cultural style, let's say, but not copy a pattern? And so we did a demo on how to look at the shape language and mimic those patterns, but come up with your own. And it's just practice. Because he's so used to just grabbing photo reference and just applying it and calling it done. And he wasn't really thinking about how to mimic those designs. Establishing the foundation, exploring large shapes and silhouette. I don't always work silhouette first. Sometimes it just depends on the task or what I'm working on. But I'm always thinking about it. Silhouette's one of those things I will say that you have to be very careful about. This is just my opinion, but some people like to work with pure silhouette first, and they usually do an orthographic front. I feel like personally that's a trap. It traps you into thinking about things two-dimensionally. I like to think about silhouette in a three-dimensional form, and so when I actually draw a lot of times, especially a character, it will be three-quarter. That will always force you to think about how things wrap around, how things are going to look from the side and the front or the back. If you do orthographic front, back, you're thinking about that two-dimensional plane surface. And then when you're challenged, whether that's as a concept artist or even a 3D artist or anything like that, you're challenged to think about how that translates to the side. Often you get lost. Now you're like, oh, I have no idea how this is going to look from the side. But if you do it from a three-quarter, I had an art director very early in my career challenge me to start doing three-quarter only, and I hated it. But that has changed everything about the way I think about design, thinking about three-dimensionally, just naturally. Once you've determined your silhouettes and everything that you're looking for, then you're going to move on to, whether they're large and extreme or small, minimal, and how those silhouettes communicate things. Obviously, we all know that if you do something like a big, burly thing, it feels like a tank. It feels like something heavy. You do something small and frail, it feels very delicate, maybe stealthy. Those very much dictate kind of the character or the thing that you're doing. Start thinking intentionally about all this stuff. Like, what do you want these to look like? So here are my first round of sketches on these. Based on my points, you can see with a lot of these, especially that far left one there, he's got a lot of nails and things actually stuck into him. There's a lot of reminiscent torture equipment style armor, very priest-like clothing. You get to some of these others, and you can see like a little bit more of the Iron Maiden look with the helmet and stuff that are like he's locked into. I have actually, me personally, I think about the backstories on some of these guys, and I can tell you like this guy was probably so evil that actually tried to encase him in something to keep him and his power at bay. So like I'm thinking about this kind of stuff when I do these designs, and I'm not just trying to create something cool. But he's a lot more bulky. I put bulky and heavy, so like added more, make him more bulky. I want to explore that spectrum. And I get over this guy on this far side. He's a lot more gothic. He's dark and disturbing. He's got a lot of I don't know if you can see it here, but he's got like these little wailing faces and things like that. There's one up here that's crying, and I just wanted to be a little bit darker and more, I don't know, disturbing, I guess. But this was my first iteration of sketches, and then I sent this off to my art director. And I also throw in real quickly here just some values to separate things, so you can see separation of layers, even get a sense of materials without getting too committed into this. This is all still pretty rough. Again, pushing some of the effects as well, just a little bit, so you can see some glows, like some of that magic, the things that I want to communicate with each of these characters. And I've actually refined these a little bit more, because I'm thinking about them a lot more. I'm actually now changing up here, and I've titled them as well. This one's called the tortured one. This is the imprisoned one. This is the night of agony. Again, my themes. I like strong themes. I like strong visions. Whenever I look at characters or designs and I see something, you can tell often when something feels generic and it's been watered down. And then you can tell when something's like that is someone had a vision and they hit it. That's what I'm always looking for. Not only my art, but other artists' work too. So that's what I've been, this whole process is looking for those visions, those big hooks. Moving on, getting into the details of the story. Explore and establish the details, the icons, the elements that convey that theme or that vision. Think about that, like, is this hitting that mark? What more can I add? What does this character have that is going to really nail this vision of who I want them to be? Think about and use materials, designs, and motifs that fit the character, who they are. So, you know, obviously, if they're going to be somebody like this, you don't want to go with, I don't know, something too fancy. You don't want them to look like some kind of royal guard or something. You don't want to use a lot of gold. You want to make these guys dark, very like rusty iron and stuff like that. You got to think about these materials, even to that granular level. I'm constantly working on props on the game that I'm working on right now with the artists, and I'm critiquing all the time materials, thinking about that. Sometimes they'll just be like, well, that's just metal, and I'm like, well, what kind of metal? Like, has it seen weather? Does it have rust on it? Like, getting into that granular detail matters, and not everyone understands or can identify that when they look at a piece. But I believe there's a part of all of us that look at a piece and go, wow, that's got some depth to it. Like, that's amazing. And you don't know why, but it's all the little details that are very intentional to tell the story of that character, even to the mud on the boots. You know, those things tell the story. Design and refine with points of interest in mind. One of the things that bothers me a lot that I've experienced with not just artists but art directors as well is when they want, let's just say in an outfit, they want detail everywhere. I don't agree with that. I think you can have subtle detail and you can have loud detail, but be very intentional about that. The points of interest. It's great to have elements of any costume or piece that are kind of like that hallmark. It's that one thing that really stands out. Like, this is the thing I want people to notice the most. There's a hook. And you want to have design with that in mind. I don't like the idea of like, okay, so I'm gonna put a skull on his chest. Now I gotta put a skull everywhere else, like on his boots, on his bracers, on his gloves, on his helmet. Like, no, like, come up with like that cool idea and let it shine somewhere in that piece. You can make the rest of it actually still work with that, but without having to like compete with it. So getting a little bit more into this, started talking to the designers a little bit more about some of his abilities and things like that. And I thought it would be really cool, which this character doesn't originally have, to have all of his weapons rotating and floating behind him. And he actually throws a projectile weapon, which is usually magic. But in this case, I thought it would be really cool if this thing would rotate and then he would throw one of these at people. And they were like, yeah, we'll work that in. We'll figure out how to make that happen. So this was just an idea of mine that I thought would be really cool, and I sold it to them and they liked it. And also my art director really liked this one, as did I. Though I think the one on the far right was actually my favorite. But they chose this one instead. Moving on, I started exploring things like he has a shield, exploring the shield again, getting into some of the torture themes here. We've got like, I explored this, I'm trying to remember the wheel, but you got these little figures that are very sculptural on it, Iron Maiden faces. This is another one of the wheels. Just exploring again this heavy theme for his shield. And then I've got like these as well here, just kind of a little broken off from the design I put behind him. But you can see a lot of the themes and the elements that I'm carrying over as well into his shield, just to make sure everything goes together, and getting into some of the color as well. Putting it all together, considering the materials that are appropriate and mixing them up. For me, I like to think about materials, things like that in like levels, like a primary, secondary, tertiary, but not just there. Maybe actually a couple of tertiary materials. It is possible. I've seen people do a lot of outfits where they do, I don't know, maybe, yeah, like 2 or 3. I like to really mix it up. I like to have some primaries and secondaries, but then some tertiaries in there. Again, it's just like, it doesn't all have to actually match. Sometimes it not matching makes it feel more organic, more real. If everything matches, it feels extremely forced and fake. Strive to unify the character design without everything matching, or sharing the same values and levels of detail or intensity. One thing that is, I always do say too, is because you like to have these areas of any design have high detail and points of interest, and then you want places of rest between and scattered around. That doesn't mean there's no detail there. It just means it's not loud. You know, obviously using things like bold patterns, high contrast, things like that will draw your eye. But maybe there's a piece of fabric that is very satiny, that has a very subtle pattern on it. That's just subtle. And that is a place of rest, even though there is a pattern and there's detail there. Learning how to use those types of tricks to still create that depth, but not, you know, but have stuff there. But it won't compete with the rest of the things that you actually want to stand out first. Choosing color schemes and values, again, strategically to design focal points. Proper and strategic levels of balance. Again, as I said, I kind of jumped ahead of myself, but it definitely makes it less artificial. So here, I've got a lot of the colors worked out. And then I'm starting the back view sketch here. Again, very 3/4 on a lot of these. It really helps me understand, and also the 3D artist understand exactly how this wraps around the body. Moving on, more refining. A lot of things that I do to, usually, especially in a production setting, I don't always go into color on the back views. It's a lot of times unnecessary. The 3D artist has most of the information that they need from the front 3/4. If I do the back view, something changes, I'm like thinking about that design, I'm like, oh, well, actually there's some bright green on the back somewhere. Then I'll do like flat color without actually rendering it out to that level, because we're talking about time. We're in a production environment. You have to find these shortcuts where you can, and provide all the information. So material references, which we'll get to as well, are extremely helpful, because we can't always like render out every little detail. I mean, I love to. It's hard for me to sometimes pull back and go, okay, I don't need to put every little rip, every little stitch, but I love it. I really do. And here's where I've included a lot of those material references and notes. This is all things to help communicate the vision, the materials, everything. Because this is going on to a 3D artist, and this really does help them a lot. You know, and as a 3D artist, maybe you're also doing the designing. Who knows? So having these types of skills, the best concepts, or I should say, the best 3D artists, whether they were character or environmental, that I've ever worked with, they could draw. They were great designers. They didn't just model. They did concept too. And there's a lot of cross skill levels that happen in the industry. But I always recommend, even with the 3D artists that I work with, I sometimes hold sketch groups for our teams, and some of them come in and join. And it's just like, hey, let's just draw, because it's gonna help everybody. Let's just draw together. And we'll throw out like, you know, fun, weird ideas or things like that. But highly, highly, no matter what your discipline is, I recommend drawing a lot. So, that's pretty much my process all the way to this end result, which I would send off to, check it in, call it done. It goes to the 3D modeler to be made. But that's like all that intentional thought, thinking about those details, why are they there, asking those questions, and really developing an idea that's got that hook and that strong vision. When you can do that, and you can just consistently do that, again, it just separates you from all the others who just are drawing cool things. You're doing something that carries a lot more value, and people will notice, especially art directors. I will say that there's one of my favorite artists that I've worked with. She is in Houston right now working at a different studio, but at the time she worked with me here. And she always would ask me why my art directors will sometimes take your first iteration and go, I like the boots here. Let's take that, let's put up with that jacket and those pants. And they'll pick and choose. Nothing wrong with that. But whenever I presented my sketches to him, he would say, that one, go. And she was like, why does that keep happening? Why do you get less feedback? Why does he make a choice on yours? I don't understand. And I told her about my process. I'm like, because I'm looking for clear visions. I'm not looking for subtle differences between them that they can pick and choose from. I want them to see a vision and choose it and go. And it worked. It saved me a lot of stress too. All right, so how are we on time? Oh, we're doing pretty good. I'll just wrap it up with this then. Because we want to get some QA as well. All right. So these are just, I thought about a couple of tips. It's more complicated than this, clearly. But tips on getting into the industry. Okay, number one, networking. Absolutely number one. I can't tell you how many times, probably at least 70 to 80% of the jobs that I have had in the industry have been because I know someone. Unfortunately, in any industry, but especially as artists in the video game industry, your resume and your portfolio will go through hands of people who are not artists before it ever gets to an art director. If you can get someone to put your name, your portfolio in front of an art director, your chances skyrocket. I've known so many artists that I've talked to and said, hey, I noticed you guys are hiring. Could you tell your art director about me? Here's my portfolio, just give me the information. Usually ends up being an interview and a job. But if I go from the normal process, I mean, chances are usually, they're there, but they're not great. They're gonna even see you sometimes. Sometimes you get eliminated out without the art director even seeing your portfolio. So networking is invaluable. So connecting with other artists, rubbing shoulders with other artists. I know we're introverts. A lot of us are. I know I am. I've always been one, and it's hard for me to, or I have been. I've gotten way better at it. But to put myself out there, it is invaluable though. You really need to. It'll get you places. Know what you want to work on. The video game industry is massive. There are so many genres, so many styles. Have an idea of the type of games that you would like to work on. Doesn't mean you're just limited to that, but have an idea and create a focus. You want to see that in your portfolio if you want to get jobs working on those projects. Again, focus and diversify though. Allow yourself to have strengths in a signature look. I know a lot of people try to mimic other looks. It is good, and I even say it's better to have your own look, but then show that you can do other things too. So you want to have these strengths, you want to show them, but you don't want to be just that either. Show diversity. That's one thing that I've tried to do with a lot of my portfolio work. There are times where I was talking to some students here earlier that I have always been, ever since a kid, a massive fantasy fan. So I just tended to get lots of fantasy jobs on fantasy projects. After a while, it was just that. And I realized, oh, I need to get some sci-fi stuff in there. I need to get some other stuff in there. It doesn't have to be equal, it doesn't have to be half and half, but I need to show that I can do other things. Last tip, how to stay sane. This is less about getting into the industry, but staying sane. Again, from my experience, not only for myself, but other artists that I've worked with, one of the biggest pitfalls that I've seen them personally run into, and I've run into, is putting all of your creative fulfillment on your job. Your job, you will be designing for other people. You will be designing their ideas. You will be designing their characters. So, we as artists and creative people have this need to feel creatively fulfilled. If you put that all on your job, you will be depressed. You will be unfulfilled, and you will not know why. Yes, enjoy your job, do what you love, but have other creative outlets. Have other creative hobbies that when you're not putting it all on the back of your job. I like to go, I love working with my hands. When I'm not working, and I'm not working on my computer, I go into my garage. I do woodworking. I love woodworking. I do costuming. So I love sculpting. I love sewing. I love doing all these other things. This is stuff that I get to be creative with. I don't have that pressure, and no one telling me how to do it. I can just do it, and that creatively fulfills me. Doesn't mean my job doesn't either. But I've known too many artists that are like, man, this is so frustrating. I'm trying to do this, and like, they want me to do this instead, and I'm just so frustrated. And they're getting married to their work because they want that to be all that fulfills them. And it just will never happen. So that is my big piece of advice. It helps keep you sane and helps keep you happy in the industry. Because, we are in the industry working on products. They are products. They are not just a fun project. They can be fun, but yeah, you're designing for other people. Anyhow. All right. Time to retire. This is my information here. I got my art station. If anyone ever wants to look at it, my email as well, open to anyone who ever wants to ask a question or chat or whatever. I'm totally open to that. Again, rub shoulders. Whether it's a veteran, whether it's a new student, someone green in the industry, doesn't matter. Rub shoulders. So I guess we can open up to some questions. All right, we'll start here in the front.
I was wondering if you had like any exercises that maybe you do or you have your team do when you're working on projects that help you kind of develop those concept art thinking about the detail skills.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they're
Exercises.
Let's see. Just really like, for example, right now, what I just showed with that character thing, we're doing one right now, and all together, and we're taking it through the stages, and I'm talking about it as I am drawing and they're drawing too, and I'm just beating it in over and over and over again. And these are just for fun. This is practice, but just really that kind of exercise, just doing that, design a character together. Everyone pick a theme, but everyone does their own design, and just then you get to share, and you'd be like, wow, I love what you did there. I love that idea, and just share, really. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've noticed that you do like all your characters typically in that 3/4 vision, and do you typically just send that straight to your modelers and then model? Because I know here at SCAD, a lot of students prefer to have like a full turnaround. Would that just be, lack of better terms, a skill issue?
A full turnaround. Are you speaking more 3D wise?
Like a 2D concept art of a turnaround for 3D modelers to model on top of.
Oh, you're talking about like, just like a base.
Yeah.
Some artists work that way. It's not necessary. It helps. I will say this, and this is my pure opinion only, coming from a concept side that is heavily 2D. I have an artist in particular who works with me. He's very, very new into this industry. He came in as an intern. Only maybe 3 months ago did he get hired on full time. He works heavily in 3D in the beginning, and it's really been a crutch for him. I have pushed him to sketch loosely first before. I think there is, I believe, again, this is my opinion, I believe there's a danger and a trap in modeling too early. But providing, if you do your design, then create a base or a turnaround or something like that that they can work off from, great. That definitely helps. Some 3D artists are like, this is a great help. Some are going to be like, I could have done this myself, and I could have done it better. So I don't even know why you did that. Like, in the industry, like it's going to be one or another, depending on who you're working with, really. But yeah, I do recommend, though, again, if you're going to do something like that, do that later in the end, not in the beginning. You're already building. You're like really intentionally placing polygons and creating shapes which are not free thinking. You're getting married to it. At least that's how I feel about it. And what I've seen other artists do, and then their exploration seems to get very stunted. So, you have a question?
Yes. Have you seen the effects of AI on your concept art team, and how would you recommend that artists kind of approach it now, going into the field?
AI is an ever-evolving thing, and I don't claim to be an expert at it at all, but I'll give you my opinion on it regardless. And I don't know what it means for the future. I have my ideas. AI is here, it's going to be here. What it'll look like tomorrow and how much of an impact it's going to make, I don't know. I think the biggest impact that I've seen is companies or management that look at AI and go, hey, we don't need concept artists anymore. We don't need designers anymore. And it's not true. But the fact that some of them believe it sucks, because that means they're not hiring. So it does affect it. How it's used right now, it's not being used obviously as much in the industry, just because a lot of the more popular ones, especially, they're all stealing. It's all theft. They're going to have to come up with services and forms where they own the rights to whatever that data bank is of images that it's pulling from and they're working with. Now, I can see it cutting corners. I can see it actually possibly dropping the number of people on a team, because you only need so many artists now to feed that machine. But I believe you will always still need artists, because all it is doing is mimicking, blending up everything that you put into it, and then spitting out the goo. You know, and it can only do that in so many variations, because it's still drawing on the same things. So where I think that might be helpful, especially in a concept setting, is maybe we get to the point where I do a character sketch, let's just say the front view or something, and I'm like, generate back views of this. I want to see, oh, okay, like there's some cool ones. I like that, but I'm going to change it and I'll paint over it. But it just saved me a lot of time too. Yeah.
Second question on top of that.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel that a company would like write in like a clause in a contract where they own the art that you make for them, and then if you were to leave, they could throw your art into an AI machine and basically have you continue to create art after you leave?
Yeah. And in fact, they already do own your art. I mean,
Right.
The fact you're working for them.
Right.
Yeah. What you have to be careful about, though, especially once you get into the industry, anything, I will say this, just to cover your own butts, and it's to cover theirs as well. I keep everything very, very separate. When you are on their machines or on their time, don't do anything personal. There are companies that will say this is now ours. There are some, not a lot, but there are some. And I would just recommend always keeping things very separate when it comes to personal work and with the work you do with a job. Yeah. Yes?
So we talked about public work. I want to ask, where do you usually go for networking or for looking for projects?
I'm fortunate to the point now that I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. And so I've got a pretty extensive network already built up. I mean, I'll go into anything from whether it's like conventions or things like that where you get to go meet other artists. That's a good place outside of work. Work is always the primary one. And that doesn't mean just people on your team. That means like reaching out to people on other teams, like Studio Online. There's at least 4 different teams working on different projects. And I've reached out to make friends with the concept artists on the other teams. And I've invited them to do sketch sessions with us, you know? Like, it's just, there's so many places you can look that are just right there in front of you. Again, cons, anything that people will go to where you might find artists even if they're not talking about art, but you're going to find them. You know, it's always good. Even gaming, just online. I don't know. Primarily for me, it's been things like the different conventions and within those studios as well. And a lot of times I go hang out with artists from my team and they know artists from others. And especially when I was living in the Bay Area, you know, you got a studio like every few blocks. So I was constantly going out with artists who knew artists working at that studio, who knew artists working at that studio. And you got to know each other. So even though I never worked with them. Let's go here.
What do you think makes a design too busy?
Visually busy?
Visually busy.
I
They do all the work of doing research and trying to go with
Visually, I mean, it really, I could probably tell you looking at a design better. It can be that over focus of trying to make everything important, you know, and that means important in like a very visual sense, like again, loud. That could be very loud details or very bold things. Sometimes subtle is where it's at. So trying to put value in the right places, think about that. Like the high value versus lower value. Everything needs to be valuable in a design. But if you're really strategically trying to get someone to look at something that is like, it's that, again, that hook. It's that thing that draws them in. The thing that makes it important. Really focus on that, put as much value in that in your time. And the less, in the other parts, you do just a little bit more subtle, a little bit more, a little less. You want to always step back and go, okay, is anything fighting? And is stuff fighting for attention? Asking yourself those questions, taking a moment to do that. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it also, but like, get up, walk around for a few minutes, come back, sit down, look at it. Because the more and more you sit there and look at your design, you're going to just be like, that little detail, and you get lost in that. But when you get away from it and you come back and you're like, whoa, there's a lot. I need to pull back on some of that stuff. Yeah. I mean, always. That should just be habit, really. Yeah. We had one over here, yes.
You were talking about how you think it's important for 3D artists to know how to draw. And the flip side, do you think also concept artists, 2D artists should know how to?
Yes. And even though I'll give you my opinion on that. I don't think it's necessary. Absolutely valuable. Yeah. Necessary and to the point that you should, if you're a concept artist, you should know what the 3D artists are doing and how they're going to build it, their approach, their methods. You should know those things. You don't have to be, exceptionally good at it. But knowing the information that they need to, effortlessly, that's the goal. Build what it is you design. It's massive. So it does take some knowledge in that field to be able to do that. So you'd be doing a design and going, oh yeah, as a 3D artist, they're gonna want to know about that, or they're gonna need to see that. I don't have an example here, but there's one in particular I did for Smile, where I broke everything apart, like into pieces. I did the design and then I broke it apart because there's so many layers, and I knew the 3D artist was gonna need that, so I did that because I have a little bit of experience in 3D, and I think you should have some. How much? Totally up to you. Yeah. Yes.
So I have a few questions for you. First one is, as a concept artist, what do you think art directors look for, or what for your portfolio was, setting it up and trying to sit it all together? What do you think they look for?
I mean, first, obviously, whatever project it is, they're looking for something that matches, that you're going to be a good fit, for whatever style. Second thing, number one, process. Show process. You show a final illustration, they're like, great, it's pretty, but I want to see what you were thinking leading up to that. I want to see you thinking about those layers, breaking things apart, thinking about, there's a little bit of engineering mindset going on a lot of times with this stuff. if you show that, that shows again that other level of like, you know how to go from point A to point B, and not only to get there, but all of that intentional designing and exploration that you went through. Because a lot of times with a really good, I mean, it doesn't, sometimes you just nail it, and you're just feeling it, you go through it, and like, it's great. Sometimes it isn't, but when it does, sometimes I've gotten to the point where it just me, looking back at my first round of sketches, I look back and I'm like, damn, we had to choose one, but I loved all of those, you know, and if you can show that, yeah, that's gold.
Okay, and for my second question is, because we're trying to like curate portfolios, what other skill sets do you think you would need to kind of show off that you are a good fit? Because like knowing Blender or just having extra knowledge in like Photoshop or like the studio, what kind of skill sets do you think they're also looking for?
That's a good question because there's a lot of soft skills. Definitely some, as we were talking about, though it's not necessary to know Blender or Substance Painter or any of these other programs as a concept artist, having that knowledge, insanely valuable, very much. And you can show that. You just don't want to like overdo that at the same time. You want to show yourself as a concept artist, if you are a concept artist. But the other soft skills that are really hard to, in a portfolio, because the portfolio is really just a visual part of it. There is also the personality part of it. And definitely showing things like your ability to communicate. Again, I have an artist on my team that it is just like, in order to get them to say something, it's like, it's so hard to get them to talk. But having those communication skills really go a long way, especially when you're talking about trying to do that detective work. An artist or a designer or somebody who asks questions, beautiful. Ask questions. Ask them all day long. Unfortunately, most of my artists don't ask enough questions. And they're like, well, I didn't know. And I'm like, well, ask me. Like, just ask. Like, there's a lot of interpersonal and communication soft skills that go a long way, especially in the field of artists. Yeah. Any others? Okay, we have another one.
You mentioned being like an art, like team lead.
Mm-hmm.
What are the major differences between that and just being like a concept artist, like on the team?
Yeah.
And do you enjoy it more?
I enjoy both equally for different reasons. Being a concept artist, I get to just create. I just work with the art director and my lead at the time, if I have a lead, but it's primarily just, drawing and doing what the designing. Working as a team lead is it's very much more heavily on the management side of things. So I'm managing the artists, I'm managing their schedules, I'm critiquing their work. Even though I'm not, like for example, right now I'm not the art director, I am art directing them. Because then when I send up the line, I am already trying to okay, no, we gotta change that, and then I'm just looking for approval at that point. So I'm playing art director at the same time, and I'm mentoring, especially on this team. I actually really enjoy it. I have one senior out of 6 artists. The rest are all juniors. And there's a lot of mentoring there, and I love it. If they're open to it, not everyone's open to it, but I'm constantly making myself available to them. And it's fun. I've got at least 2 artists that have just in the last year grown so much. And looking at them, I get excited because where they're at in their career and where I was at that time, they're leagues beyond where I was. And I love seeing that growth. They're going to go real far. Yeah.
One thing, you quantify you mentioned junior and senior roles, so
Yeah.
you kind of quantify years in industry, and I know it's going to be a pretty big range, but is there a gauge that's probably relevant to folks?
Yeah, based on studios, everybody says what a junior is, and they have the junior 1, junior 2, and all those different things. It all varies between the industry. If I were to generalize that though, like a junior is probably like maybe 2 to 3 years, and then you'd have just concept role beyond that, and senior somewhere like maybe, I've seen it as early as 5 years, maybe 6 for a senior, and then beyond that, you're looking at maybe 10 years to be something like a principal, or they call it sometimes advanced artist, which I'm really glad they didn't always have that role. Usually you went up to senior, and then the only place you could go is management. But now they've got like principal, where you can get promoted, but still stay in that artist role, not have to go into management if you don't want to. It's not for everyone. Yeah.
So one more question, when it comes to like showing off your portfolio, what sites do you recommend and what type of like organization do you recommend if that matters?
I mean, right now, especially concept art, ArtStation's king, in my opinion. If you've got an ArtStation, you're good. I mean, you can have other presences, you can have Instagram and all these other things. I don't do that. I have never felt like it works against me. I think it works for people, and maybe one of my best friend, who's a concept artist, he's massively on Instagram. And I know it gets him a lot of leads, again, for jobs too. He's got his work out there and he's like, hey, I'm looking for a job, and like people hit him up. So massively valuable. But having for at least portfolio use, I recommend ArtStation. It's what I love. It's what I've always used, at least as long as it existed. Before that, I'm trying to remember, what's it called? It was concept.org. Was it? You remember that? Yeah, no longer really there. But yeah. Any more? Should be good.
That should be good. Thank you, Sven.
All right. Again, I'll hang out here for